Thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. I know you're a very busy man.
On the contrary, I'm very thankful to you for inviting me.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me. I'm interested in finding out your journey into traditional architecture. I think you've got a lot of admirers. You've inspired a new generation of architects. It'd be nice to understand how you got into the whole realm of traditional architecture, because most schools don't guide you down that path.
No, no, and in fact, I graduated from Ain University, and then I was first of my class. I became an instructor, and I was uh, uh, developing ideas to make my masters and doctors. And I was misguided by the professors there. They were asking me to do really projects that had nothing to do with our problems in Egypt. You know, they threw projects like do a nuclear energy thing, do a UNESCO building. I mean, usually these buildings, when they are commissioned in Egypt, they're always given to foreigners. They don't give it to local architects. I mean, hotels, for example, are given to Intercontinental. They get their architects from America. So I was trying to do something which could solve the problems we have in Egypt. And we had a very big problem with housing. So we used to meet, all of us instructors just graduated. We used to meet at the club, at the sporting club, and discuss what we can do for Egypt, especially after 76 when we lost the war. We were trying, what can we do as architects for our country? And then I was speaking of traditional architecture and how to make architecture that's indigenous to our country. And one guy told me, wishful thinking. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's a man 40 years he's been trying to do that. Who's that man? He said, Hassan Fathy. Imagine, I didn't know Hassan Fathy. 5 years at university, nobody mentioned it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I went and met this man, and I looked at his work, and the first impact I had, because I did sculpture, I did painting since I was a young boy of 12, 13. I used to draw, and I went to an Italian master for teaching me how to paint and sculpt. And I saw this beautiful architecture that was created out of a very poor material, mud, in Upper Egypt, in Nubia. And I was furious. Why is this man not mentioned at university? And I found that he is recognized in the world. In England, they wanted to publish his book, Architecture, and our schools sort of banned him. They wanted, you know, high-tech architecture. We don't want that cheap, dirty mud. And but you know, as a man who did sculpture, Rodin did the most expensive sculptures in mud brick. He wasn't a Michelangelo doing with marble, so the material had nothing to do. What we're trying to do is, which I later said has to be taught at universities when I made studies on pedagogy, on the teaching the students the science of forms. How do forms take shape? And you had a brilliant guy in England, if you recall his name, Darcy Thompson, who did this beautiful book on growth and form. And he was a contemporary of Darwin, and he was put aside because it was in the interest at the time to promote the theory of man coming from the monkey to the progressive mentality of modern mind.
What was it only you, or whether did you have contemporaries, your fellow students? Were they interested in those ideas as well? Were you very much against the grain in those times? 'Cause
No,
in the late 60s, there was a move towards a move away against globalization to a certain
no,
extent. But
the university was a disaster because, first of all, we had a library. And the library, the employer would work from morning till 2 o'clock, and then they'd go home. And we had classes from morning till 2 o'clock. So if I wanted to go to the library, it was after 2 o'clock. The door was closed. So nobody accessed the books.
right,
I was fortunate enough to know the librarian who was in school with my father.
right.
So he
So
said, I'll get you the books. He would take the books uh, because we were not even allowed to take books from the library because, you know, in a country
yeah,
that's
yeah,
economically
yeah.
in disaster, you
You have
can't
to read them
afford to
there.
lose a book. So he'd get the books for me, and I'd read them, give them back to him, he'd put them back in the library. And the best book I had at the time that I found in the library was edition 1888 of John Ruskin,
Right.
the Seven Lamps of Architecture,
Yeah, yeah.
which I considered one of the best critics written on architecture.
So you've very much forged your own path. You were looking out for your own. Where where do you
Yes,
think that came from?
at
Was
the
it
end, I used to have more knowledge than the ones professors that are teaching as an
because
instructor
you?
because they didn't read books. And I was fortunate to have, uh, you know, like Churchill when he said, when he came back to England, so he said, I had to fulfill my destiny. So sometimes you have certain situations
Right.
which sort of
And what in your upbringing did you attribute that to? Was it a religious? What was it in your upbringing? In
my
your
opening
upbringing,
of
your
bring
childhood or your learning? Was it a religious interest or an interest in humility, that turning against the sort of
no, I was brought
globalization?
up in a very one of the best schools in the whole Middle East, which was the Victoria College,
Right,
which was run by the British teachers, and I was a boarder there, and then I went to the English school also, which was they were schools done by the British to bring us sons of ministers and so on and so on,
right,
to bring an elite that would be pro-Britannic,
right.
right? Yeah.
So it was just original thinking. You were taught to think for yourself, really.
Yes, yes, it was because of curiosity. I think it was also what triggered it was in 67. We were really humiliated by the 67 war.
hmm
And I wanted to do something for Egypt. I felt I had to do something for my country.
And looking at tradition was part of
Yeah,
that.
and also I grew up in my aunt's house when my parents divorced, and her husband was Prime Minister of Egypt at the time of King Farouk, and he was represented the whole Middle East. He was of the biggest party in Egypt until the revolution. So I was brought up trying to do something for my country, not having a grocery shop or something, but to do something for the country. That's what
Yeah.
triggered it, I think.
And your searching out Fathy was part of that, and looking at
Yeah,
what he was
because
doing.
Hassan Fathy also he dedicated his life to do something for Egypt, and he wanted to solve the housing problem.
But
There's
I understand that he told you you might be sacrificing your career. One of the interviews I saw of yours was he thought you were turning your back on the profession by
No,
going
I
down that.
wanted to
No,
leave Egypt because
right.
we were harmed by the revolution because we were from the old regime, and I said I don't want to stay in Egypt anymore. And there was no work after the six. I graduated 65, 67. We went to an economic crisis because of the war and because of the mismanagement of the Nasser regime. And I didn't want to do. I didn't want to live in Egypt, and I wanted to leave. And he got annoyed. He said, "If you don't want to serve the country, who will do it?
Mm-hmm.
You were brought up to be of service to your country." He was very patriotic, but of course he grew in a generation 1900 before all the messed up events of First War and Second World War and Gaza and Israel and all this mess we've been in. I mean, I've lived my life in Egypt, war after war.
Mm-hmm.
Iraq War, 73 wars, 67 war, 56 war. I grew up with the war.
And how do you think young architects will, are they still, do you find as an educator, do you find that they're embracing
No, it's
those
disaster.
ideas?
It's disaster.
That, and you're aware of all the changes for you, in the same as my career, we've seen quite a lot of changes in
Yeah,
technology.
yeah.
Do you see optimism in that, the way that the computers are evolved? I know you draw all the time. You're a great
The
drawer.
only optimism I have is that I became a member of the British family.
Right.
I have,
Okay.
I have a British passport now. That's the
Okay.
only optimism.
Okay. Okay.
You know, and
But
I did one of my most beautiful buildings in Oxford.
yeah, I mean, there's a fantastic
Yeah,
photograph of that with people playing cricket
yeah,
in the
and
foreground, and it's this beautiful, partly Islamic
I was
imagery. And
I owe this a lot to King Charles as the Prince of Wales at the time. He insisted I do the design, and at the opening, he gave a beautiful 10 minutes describing the architecture and how I managed to blend the British style with the Islamic. And
did you find that difficult, or how did you embrace that? Because it must.
because the scholastic buildings originally developed in Islam. So if you look at Oxford and Cambridge, there is no traditional college that doesn't have a courtyard.
Yeah, you're very passionate about courtyards. That's
Yes, because
in
the
your houses.
courtyard is there was an Englishman who wrote a paper on the courtyard as a functional. You know, it's the cold air drops at the night, and
Oh, right,
then
right.
it
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
it cools the house during
Right.
the hot day and so on. And I always say, let's forget this functional mind of modern, but look at architecture in a spiritual sense. And if you look at the courtyard house, the protagonist is of the house is the courtyard with the fountain and the trees and the nature. And it's the God created world that becomes the protagonist. And the man fashioned element is at the border. So it's like a painting. You have a frame, but the main element is the painting of the frame, not the frame.
Yeah.
So you are framing God's nature, a creation, and also you have a unique sense of a private skyscape,
Mm-hmm.
which is amazing because if you are in courtyard, you see the stars at night, you have a skyscape with the landscape, which just by the framing.
And do you think security and identity is part of that as well? Whether it binds together in the case
Yes,
of
because
a
the
court?
house has to be, you know, the pharaonic emblem for a house, huh?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
It's a
yeah.
womb with a passage.
Right,
It's
right,
exactly the symbol of the womb,
right.
and the house has to have the security of the womb. And this is a lot of Jungian talk that came out from his symbolism and so on. But basically, the pharaohs represented the house as a womb with a tunnel leading to the opening with the, I mean,
Yeah,
transformation of nature in art. But and also they had the city. The city is very interesting. The emblem of the city was a disc with a cross,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
had the four quarters. And this came very famous as the Axis Mundi in the West. But and the crossroad at the middle, and then you had representing of a vertical element in the center, like a nipple.
Mm-hmm.
So it was also related to the breast. But
But
uh,
you also described the courtyard as the soul as well.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the soul of the
No,
house
this
or
is
the soul of the
something I always
college.
felt that a house without a courtyard is like a man without a soul. And this came about when I was doing a farmhouse for somebody in Saudi Arabia. And I was doing the courtyard, and he said that I'm not flexible in my thinking. He said courtyard was for the city, but here I have a farm that is huge with palm trees, and why should I have a courtyard? And when I did the courtyard, he stayed there. He didn't go out in the gardens anymore. He loved it. And I realized that it's not a matter of material space, like how many trees, how many,
Mm-hmm.
but that the courtyard created a serenity
Mm-hmm.
and a sacredness that you cannot feel when you're outside. And then there was, what's his name? Merkia Eliade, who made an analysis of sacred space. And he said the most important thing in sacred space is to create a boundary.
Right, right.
And that's why you have all the traditional churches, monasteries. You had the courtyard was in our culture until the modern disaster that happened. But you had even in the English language, the lady of the court, the court of justice, everything that happened
Mm-hmm.
had the term court with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what we're in Doha at the moment, and you know we're sitting next to the Masharib Quarter. That's built in stone. It's traditional materials, but it's not traditional construction. Do you think it's successful in the imagery? Or I suppose the heart of my question is really, do you think that traditional architecture can be scaled? Because it's been finished for 5 years or so. If it was built in traditional
You,
materials, it would
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
would still be
yes,
built,
yes.
being built now. Well,
You remind me of a beautiful saying, uh, and I quote it a lot. Somebody, an Englishman, uh, who was not really writing much about architecture, but he was talking about tradition and traditionalism.
Mm-hmm.
He said tradition is the living spirit of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionalism is the dead spirit of the living.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you ask, is this tradition or traditional, you judge. I will keep my mouth shut.
No, it's definitely a incorporating of traditional motifs, but it's not
Yeah.
traditional by any means. But I'm curious as to whether you think it's successful as an addition to the
It can be
city.
successful if you have it in Madame Tussauds
Right.
museum.
Right.
You have there Prince Charles and King and
Yeah.
all,
Kylie Minogue.
all.
Yeah.
Go and talk to them.
Right. But I
No,
the Islam
uh,
Centre in Oxford. That's you obviously had to build run with a much larger team that you didn't
no,
know.
let me teasing apart. Uh, when you look at architecture, the intelligence is never to see it as an end product. A man of culture does not seek the end. It is the process of living and doing that you care about. For example, if you want to be the top of a company, CEO, at the end you want to get rid of the old one.
Mm-hmm.
So do you shoot him, or do you do better work to get promoted? So in a culture, you don't look at the end. The end shouldn't be doing a traditional work. The end is how are you going to build it? How economical is going to be? How are the local people going to profit from it?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you had uh, you had in England like Morris, William
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Morris,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you had a lot of people, John Ruskin, you had Pugin, they called him the architect of God. You had, the name of the guy who wrote The Simple Life? Uh, you know, I,
Um,
I sometimes surprise people in England because uh, I believe England had a great movement
yeah.
and great people. What was the man who wrote Self-Help Smiles?
There's been a few. We had a lot of community architecture
No, this was a
movements.
writer. He
So,
wrote of the people that made Britain great, and one of them was Wedgwood.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
The story of Wedgwood still keep in my mind. There's others, but Wedgwood was insisting on getting a special glaze,
Yeah.
and for 15 years he kept at it. And he needed a fire for his skull. He took all the furniture of his house and put it in the furnace to get the glaze. And his wife divorced him because of that. She went crazy. But at the end, he did it. And now in every airport in Harrods, you have,
With the Wedgwood. Yeah.
yeah, so uh, one lesson which individual or a nation should learn from this book was perseverance.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Perseverance is what made Great Britain.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask you this at the end, but I'm going to ask you now because you're leading on to it. So, I've just written a play about
A play.
the rivalry between Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. It's about their legacy. So in
Fantastic. I have to have that book.
well,
Yeah,
so Leonardo was a man of ideas. He never finished anything.
yeah,
He wasn't really worried about his legacy, what he was going to leave behind.
yeah.
He dressed flamboyantly, and he was interested in the way the world works. Michelangelo wanted to be the best in the world ever. He got really annoyed if somebody else, like
Yeah.
Raphael, got a commission that he didn't
Yeah.
have. The older I get, the more I'm fascinated by people's attitude towards legacy.
I would vote for
What's yours?
Leonardo
Leonardo. I thought you would.
immediately
I thought you
before you
would,
tell
but
me all the details.
yeah. It's interesting because some people just want to explore and are curious about the world. Other people want to have this desire to leave some grand monuments
Do you
behind.
know
You seem like a very
Leonardo used to spend days working Islamic geometrics?
yeah. No, he
Yeah,
was very curious about
yeah.
everything, and
And
yeah,
this comes to the subject of why geometry is important and why they don't teach it at architectural school anymore.
yeah.
I have, I had 400 interviews in England, and when I do the interview, I give them a set square of 45 degrees and one of 36 degrees, which they use all the 5 years drawing, and ask them what the ratios of the sides are. They wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I say if this is one in a 45-degree right angle, if this is one, what are the other sides? They'd come to the diagonal and say 2. I tell them, no, it's root 2.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know Pythagoras.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that I think
And I
we
embarrassed them so much that some of them cried when they were doing the interview. Because you have a guy who's coming, he's graduated and so on, and you ask him questions of an instrument that he's been using for 5 years, he doesn't know. The only one who really used to emphasize geometry was a friend of mine, Keith Critchlow. And I introduced him to the Prince of Wales, and he became part of the team that the Prince was seeking as traditional architects. But Keith Critchlow was brilliant with his geometry. Poor guy, he died.
yeah.
Uh,
How much does religion play in your work? You talk a lot about.
that's a very good question. Because this answer was given to me by a disciple of Jean Piaget.
Mm-hmm.
And that disciple said to me, all art in the world was first established by religion. And that was a very interesting information for me.
Even the primitive religions,
Everything.
yeah.
It was related with magic, with sacred, whatever,
Yeah.
but it was not related because he wanted to be a Michelangelo.
Yeah.
So even the cave drawings was magic, like a talisman to hunt the animal.
Yeah, to explain or to
Right?
record. Yeah,
Huh?
yeah.
So basically, and also you have in the culture and in the Quran, which is our revealed book, people there's passages where people do knots and everything, black magic.
Mm-hmm.
And also now, if you open YouTube, you have hundreds of I don't know how many videos on satanic practice. with the inverted pentagon and
Yeah.
pentagram and
Yeah.
so on. So I think this is what destroyed Egypt at one moment, because they went too far with magic, and that is why it was always in tradition uh, keeping the knowledge of the temple secret, so that nobody would abuse it. And you have it today. What was the saddest day in for Oppenheimer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The
When
day
they
of the
bombed
bomb.
Japan.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
all regretted having worked for the atomic bomb,
Yeah.
because any human being that still believes that life is sacred would never go to the limits of what's happening today. So basically, you ask me, architecture, uh, the path which one goes in life will never lead you, uh, what they say, the road of the road to hell is filled with good
Good
intentions.
intentions.
There is
Yeah.
no good intentions unless you have a true understanding and knowledge of the created world. And this is what religion has always explained, not in the scientific way. You know, uh, how I can explain this is very important. You see patterns here and so on. Why are these geometric patterns? So I noticed one pattern that was always present in Islamic art. It was a vase with a seed in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had scrolls,
Yeah.
and then you had the flowering and the fruit.
Abstractions of nature.
And on two sides you had two cypress trees.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what is it? They don't have imagination? Why do they keep repeating this pattern? There must be a reason. And then when you get to code and decode traditional art, you realize that there's a lot of symbolism which the modern artist does not understand, because he thinks that symbolism is a personal thing. He does anything and say it's symbolic. No, symbols are encapsulated uh, expressions of hundreds of words. That's why the image, you say in England, one image is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So the one image that showed the two cypress trees with the vase, with the scrolls, with the flowers and the fruit, is nothing but space, time, and motion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How many people will read Einstein and understand him?
Not many.
But when you do a symbol like this,
Yeah.
although you don't know the symbol, it has its imprint on you. This is the psychology of images, and that is why it's very dangerous when you watch TV and they make a quick ad of drink Coca-Cola, and then you want to drink Coca-Cola, but you know your eye picked it, but your brain didn't record it. Or using certain images in advertising would force you to go and condition you to behave the way the psychology uh, of the ad wants you to do, or whatever. But anyhow, this image, to come to it, how would it represent space, time, and motion? Very simple. You have the seed, all
Right.
potentiality.
Right.
You have the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Time is the distance between the seed and the flower.
Right. Yeah.
So potentiality is all time. When the fluorination comes about, all time has gone to total space.
Yeah.
It's one continuum,
Yeah.
because it's like a hourglass. you put space, you turn it again, it's time.
Yeah.
The sand
Yeah.
goes from
Yeah.
one continuum to the other. And how does it go? The third part of Einstein, which is motion.
Mm-hmm.
And motion is represented by the scrolls.
Right.
And the Quran says that he created everything in this world by duality, feminine, masculine,
Mm-hmm.
negative, positive. This wasn't discovered in England except with the botanist in the 18th century.
Yeah. 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 Took us.
How was it in the
Mm.
Quran?
Yeah.
Unless it
Well,
was revealed.
yeah. Well, you do get the sense being in this part of the world that you are in the heart of civilization, and there's so many answers here that took us till this sort of 18th
It's like
century.
if you look at pharaonic, because unfortunately the Muslims think that from the Quran that Pharaoh they were blasphemers and so on, but it is one Pharaoh who drowned while chasing Moses.
Mm-hmm.
But pharaonic culture is the anvil. It's the cradle of religion and civilization. And if you study it properly, realize that also Idris was a prophet. And some say it's he who built the pyramids. You know who Idris is?
No. No.
Enoch.
Oh, right. Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we don't know that history enough. Thank goodness that Champollion discovered the tablet and we able to decipher hieroglyphics. But there is a lot that is hidden in Egypt, and the authorities don't want to do the excavations, let it
Yeah.
out,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's going to be no, they're saying aliens and not aliens, but you know,
To
there's hundreds of theories, but there's still a lot to discover in Egypt. So
And there are no palaces. We discover the tombs, but no palaces.
yeah, because the palaces were built in mud brick. So Pharaoh built his palace with the same material as the poor man.
Interesting. Yeah.
So if you want to talk of democracy, maybe
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
should revise
Yeah.
whether it came from America or
They
came
were
from
focusing.
pharaonic Egypt.
Yeah.
But the temples, because they are permanent, were done in granite.
For the afterlife. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
they were for posterity.
Yeah.
It's like if I build a mosque today, I would try to do it in a material that would last at least 3,000 years. I've done mosques in Saudi Arabia that didn't last 30 years
Right.
because they were done in lousy concrete
Right.
with sand with sea salt bed construction.
But you've also done a lot of traditional construction, and one of the things I was really impressed many years ago when you wanted to give your award to you seemed like a great collaborator. You wanted to share your
Oh,
award with
this
the
was my first
stonemason.
Aga Khan award in 1980. And the mason had taught me how to build domes and vaults without centering and formwork.
Mm-hmm.
And he was working for the government building Hassan Fathy's village in Gurna in the 1948. And a wood thing went into his eye, blinded one eye. So the government took him to hospital. He stayed 3 weeks there without going to work. When he went back to work, he found they canceled his salary for 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And the man was getting old, and he was building the Agami house, and he was not very happy with the. He didn't realize it was very expensive there, and he took a daily payment that he would do in Upper Egypt, which cost 5 times in a resort like. So he was complaining, so I told him I'll make it up for you. And he said, you architects, once the work is finished, you forget us. I told him I won't forget you. So when the Aga Khan Award came, I recommended to have the people who worked in the house to share the award with me. And then, of course, the snobs from Harvard and MIT and so on, who were in the steering committee, we do not give this award to stonemasons and workmen. And I wrote to the Aga Khan, I said, if I don't share it with them, I will not accept the award. So the Aga Khan accepted, and I went and we had our first session in Pakistan because of the Aga Khan. So the first award was in Pakistan, and we went to Zia was giving the awards, and I came with my mason, and everybody was impressed. They said the architects that shared the award of 1980 in other projects and so on, they avoided letting the evaluation committee see the workman, the craftsman. You're the only one who. And I wrote in the architectural journal in England, they made an article, and they saw the letter I wrote to the Aga Khan. And I told him why these people should have the award and be recognized, because without them you cannot produce the architecture.
Yeah. I mean, architects aren't known for being that collaborative. It's a very confrontational business. We're right from the start.
But you had in England the arts and crafts movement.
Yeah.
And people, if they read history, they know things that have been right and things that have been wrong. That is why history is very important.
Yeah. But there's also a commercial side, and I'd like to talk about that just for a little bit, if you don't mind, just because you seem like a great collaborator, and the way you work with people and the way you acknowledge people. But in the modern world, it can be quite a confrontational business that first of all, you have to get planning permission. You have to present your work. A lot of people aren't very good at that. A lot of architects aren't very good at collaborating and coming to consensus. Has that always been part of your philosophy, to work with people rather than try to work?
You remind me of something. When I was doing the Oxford Center, the planning committee was really annoyed with the director, very unpleasant person, unfortunately. So we needed 20% space, and I was working with an English office that was doing the management, some British architects who, deal with the planning and all this menial work that I wasn't interested in. And then I told this architect, he said the planning will not give us more than 2%. I said, I want to go and meet them. He said, oh, no. Knowing my nature, he said, you're going to make it worse. No, please, those planners, you're going with your hot blood to those English guys. But they said, no, diplomacy. So I went.
How did it go?
I got the 20%. And everybody was astounded. I got the 20%, and we made the extra spaces that were needed. And they were amazed how I managed to convince the bureaucracy of the planners. And It's what you said, collaboration. I looked at them and said, we are a winning team. We want to be a winning team.
Yeah.
Why do you want to stop it? I'm doing this to make something for Oxford. Why are you wanting to stop it? What is it you advantage to do that?
And do you think architects are getting better at collaborating and better at acknowledging the whole team, or
It
are
has
there
to
any
be,
particular
it has to be, you know, in tradition, every profession had a song. I remember when I was young, and I'd wake up in the morning when a building was uh, being erected next to me. And the workers would sing, Hela, Hop, Hop. And you hear those songs. And you know, they had the fisherman song, the baker song. It's like My Fair Lady, the film.
Yeah, yeah,
People used to sing
yeah,
with their jobs. They were happy. Now they hate work.
yeah. I
But
mean,
before, people loved work.
yeah. I
It,
mean, I'm really interested in the charge of the construction industry at the moment. The direction of it is about prefabrication, automation, off-site construction, and robotics, and we seem to be missing out on the well-being and the
no,
physical craft of actually
it's
doing
not
things.
robotic or anything. It's
Your work isn't, but
you know,
if you when you look at the buildings going up in London, you see robots laying bricks
yeah,
and delivering materials.
leave this, go to the essence always,
Mm-hmm.
and take symbolism, because symbolism can say things that you'd write a book about. Why does the devil have three prongs in his lance?
Don't know.
Ah, you see? One is ignorance,
Okay.
the other is greed, and the third is unwarranted desire, something that doesn't belong to you, you want it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the whole industry now is based on a nature of a character that has lost the spiritual and divine element. We're becoming barbarians in the true sense. It's a matter of money. I saw there is an English man, I can't mention his name now, it's very difficult, but he wrote a book and I tried to meet him. One I met, Eric de Marais, who wrote of death and of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, I forgot his name, it's difficult to pronounce, but he wrote a book called Grip of Death.
Don't know.
And you know, Grip of Death, what is the Latin origin of it?
No.
Engagé à mort in French, in Latin, mortgage.
Okay.
So he wrote that 90% of houses in England are going to be repossessed by building societies and the banks.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it in America also. I saw a lot of houses being repossessed because they couldn't pay the. You lose your job, finished. So that's not the way. That's not the way. Building it shouldn't be a burden. And private property is one of the last remaining uh, of a human right, because without property you are a slave.
How would you describe your politics? You're a believer in socialism. You like that everybody wants to be well rewarded. Would you go further than that? Would you?
I'm a non-believer of isms.
Okay,
I don't have any ism.
okay. So you forge your own path. You don't.
No, I seek the truth,
Right.
because It is the truth that will be the end of human endeavor.
In the New Testament, that Jesus tells us that the meek shall inherit the earth. I think
Yeah.
that I always hope that that's true, but there's not a lot of evidence
No,
that
this is
it's true.
symbolic language also. It's telling people, don't be arrogant, you idiots, because an arrogant person is an idiot. And Jesus, uh, you have to understand the symbol of Jesus and how it is in Islam. Jesus is of an immaculate birth.
Mm-hmm.
That means he is a pure soul. And he is a symbol of love. There is, because every masculine soul has a striking power, but he is not. And the beautiful passage in the Quran is when God asks Jesus, have you told them that you are my son? And the Quran answers Jesus, he says, God, if I told them I'm your son, you would have known it. So they asked, so God tells him, if they ask you how you are born from without a man,
Yeah.
tell them it is easy upon us. Remember Adam, he was born of no man and no
Mm-hmm.
woman.
Mm-hmm.
This is a language that is amazing, because the problem that happened in Europe of denying the spiritual and the religious is the result of the rationalism of a Cartesian mentality. Je pense donc je suis, which is a whole renaissance. And that is why in art you see it. Before the Renaissance, you never had perspective.
Yeah.
And it became a fashion and madness perspective at the end. They say, oh, it's because Dürer uh, found the vanishing points and
Yeah.
they made a science out of it. But no, perspective became popular because of one reason, is that with the Renaissance you dropped universal principles and you created opinionated society with everybody having his own theory.
Questioning. Yeah.
So when you say my point of view, you're talking of perspective. It's where you're looking from.
Yeah. Yeah. There seems to me, so I got interested in architecture because I picked up a book in in the 1970s, written, and it described the work of an architect, and it seemed to me,
Who?
so it was written by a guy called Derek Senior, and it had illustrations in it by David Rock, who went on to become the president of the
Yeah.
RIBA, and but the way it described an architect was more or less like a priest, that you had a social responsibility, you cared
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
and I was fascinated by that, and I wanted to be an architect from that point on.
Yeah.
But the profession has changed enormously
Yeah.
since then.
And
It's no
also,
longer a community-based pastoral care sort
yeah,
of.
yeah, people know that I I reject modern art. I get very annoyed with it. And but there is one thing, if you study properly the history, the artist tried to replace the man of religion.
Mm-hmm.
He was trying to find expression in a modern world. But and so they had to destroy certain things. And of course, Picasso shocked the world when he did Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and he got rid of perspective, and he got rid of chiaroscuro, and he made a scandal. and then the Impressionists
Yeah.
by uh, dissolving form by pointy, point,
Pointillism or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
pointillism,
yeah,
or what
yeah.
they call it, yeah. And but really, Picasso, they found his sketchbooks. He was always sketching those African masks,
Yeah.
and Miro was had a whole file of Arabic calligraphy and scrolls. And Frank Lloyd Wright, he was influenced by the Japanese. His houses, he got him, which I think I personally love Japanese art and architecture.
Because it's rooted in this, in the culture, and this,
It was my favorite before I really got into Islamic.
and it has courtyards. It does.
Not only this, it is uh, it has the spirit of Zen,
Mm-hmm.
which is saying uh, and doing things which the expression of who was it, Wordsworth, that simplicity that doesn't cost less than everything. Who said this?
Simplicity. Was that Ruskin?
That simplicity that doesn't cost less than everything.
Right. Don't know.
I think it was Wordsworth, I think.
Wordsworth. Yeah.
So I love that sentence because in Egypt, in Arabic, we call it السهل الممتنع, which is that simple thing that is basically unachievable, that simplicity. And you had it when they compare sculpture, Greek with Egyptian, and they say Egyptian, Greek sculpture is the best in the world. That's the American Weston,
Mm-hmm.
they go
Mm-hmm.
back to the West goes back to Greece. Geometry, Pythagoras, but Pythagoras got it from Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, being from Egypt, I say no. It's Greece is what Greece, when it does a sculpture, it's the beginning of realism. But if you look at Egyptian sculpture, it's magical. First of all, the statue, you don't see his bum and his backside, which is not interesting, except if you're an ape that's going to go and sniff his backside. So it has a stela and the scripture on it. And then you have his face is full expression. When you come to the feet and everything, it's just the line. It's not like Greek sculpture where you see the toes and the nerves and so on, because the the predominance is in the face and the eyes, and then everything is stylized. So you find those beautiful statues. Uh, I can't accept Michelangelo and David in Florence. Uh, I think it's carnal
Mm-hmm.
in a way. But the pharaohs, no, they don't show. They have the apron. It's very decent culture.
Yeah.
It's a sculpture that belongs to the temple,
Yeah.
not to a sex museum or.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because Leonardo was always accused of putting a fig leaf on Michelangelo's
Yeah,
Davids because there was a lot of because it was the time of Savonarola,
yeah.
and the religious right didn't like that the nudity.
And,
Just
and
one last question, because I've the older I get, I still remain curious about everything, and particularly the future. I wonder if you are the same. And when I go to schools of architecture, I just wish I was a student again doing the projects.
yeah.
Do you are you still curious about what the future is going to be, or are you worried about it? Or what's your what's your feeling about
I
the
know
world that we're leaving to our another generation?
René Schwaller de Lubitsch, who was a mystic and came and lived in Egypt for 15 years. And 15 years he was there in Luxor with his wife, who was an expert on hieroglyphs, deciphering the architecture and of the temple. And he did a work, I mean, 10 times more interesting than Champollion, but nobody ever gave him the credit. We have a road in Egypt called Champollion Street, but Lubitsch, because Lubitsch entered into the mind, the thinking of pharaonic uh, consciousness. And the the man told Hassan Fathy, "You're not going to achieve anything in your life." That was in 48. And Hassan Fathy told him, "Why do you say this?" And because he was Wisnik and he was working the age with the cycles and
Mm-hmm.
the astrology, and he said, because the world is entering an age of destruction. And in fact, he was talking of the seasons.
Mm-hmm.
We are leaving the season of Pisces, which has been for the last 2,000 years since Jesus Christ, and we're entering the age of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
And he described the age of Aquarius as having a lot of turbulence.
Oh, it certainly has.
Yeah, yeah. And this is, we're in the beginning now of it, so God help us. Mm.
Well, we can't leave it like that. And there's one of the other things I read, which I was curious about. I'm not going to leave it on
Yeah, yeah.
such a pessimistic note,
It's
because
not
it.
pessimistic.
Okay,
Why
go.
should it be pessimistic?
Well,
You are
I
going
think
to make like those Jehovah Witnesses who came to my house in England, knocked at my door, opened the door, said, "What do you want?" They said, "Do you think God is cruel?" I said, "Cruel? Why?" "Well, a plane crashed the other day and 200 people were dead. So God is cruel?"
yeah,
It's not pessimism.
just being realistic.
Yeah, you are here for a period in your life. Whether you go at childhood, whether you go at 40 or at 50, it depends on the trip
Yeah,
your
it's a
soul
journey.
has
Yeah.
to go through. This they called it in Egypt Ba and Ka,
Mm-hmm.
and they proved it mathematically. And how they proved it is like today, if you go into a parking lot, not with electric cars, but with internal combustion, and you put your hand on the hood, and the car's been moving,
Mm-hmm.
you'll feel the heat coming out from
Yeah.
the engine, right? But if it's been parked for a while, you'd put your hand and you'd feel cold.
Mm-hmm.
So, by pure mathematics, why was the car hot? Because there was fuel that was sparked by a spark plug, and it exploded and created heat. And it called it internal combustion engine. There was a combustion. Uh, when it's called the car, that means the engine wasn't running and
Yeah.
there's no fuel. So if you look at a human being, he's been living all his life having a temperature of 37 degrees centigrade. When he's dead, he becomes cold dead. So where did what happened to that fuel? What made the body warm and animated? And so the Pharaoh said, that means there was two things in it, and by being called, there's been a subtraction. And they named the Ba and the Ka. And they discovered the soul and the body, which today you have people saying there is nothing after life and so on. No, life is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
Whether Egypt had 300 years of corruption. And I don't know if it's the ones mentioned in the Quran where people went and slept in the cave for 300 years until the bad times went away. And they didn't know. They came back, they found all the people have changed, the rulers, everything. But they thought they slept a day or two, but they were 300 years sleeping in the cave, hibernating. A bear sleeps all the winter, right? So, as they say, gone with the wind. We're all going, but what we have to do is try not to provoke the Satan, because if you see people how the way they are killed, how Vietnam was sprayed with napalm and I mean, what kind of warfare are we having now? Where is the nobility of going out with a sword at the battlefield?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's strange times, and
It's evil times.
you're
It's evil times. You have to admit
you're
it.
yeah, it is, and you're obviously a great thinker, and you it must really hurt looking at what's happening now.
Of course,
But
it's because I have grandchildren. So when I'm trying to do something, is we are building for our generations to come. I have a beautiful two grandchildren. They are the joy of my life, and I want them to have a good future.
yeah, well, the knowledge that you pass on to them and your philosophy of life that you pass on to them, I'm sure you will. You've been a delight to interview, and you've
Thank
given
you. That's very kind of you.
and an
I'm
inspiration.
usually not very. I'm usually try to be more diplomatic, but
Well, it's good.
I
It's
have
good.
a friend of my nephew. He attended a lecture in Turkey, and he said, "Your uncle is the worst PR man in the world because I had enough of this denial.
Yeah, you've got to be honest. I think that's one of the great traits, and it's one of the nice things also about growing old. You can say what you think of it,
Yeah,
and be a bit more honest
it's
with
like
people.
this joke. This guy is miserable, and he says, one day I sat there really depressed and sad, and a voice came to me and it said, cheer up, things could get worse. So I cheered up, and the voice was right, it got worse. so,
So that's a good point to end.
so let's cheer up.
Thank you very much. Thank
Thanks
you.
you.